Why did the bicycle fall over? Because it was too tired. Too tired. All right, that was the joke of the day. And today we have a great guest, Robert Pantano. He is an author and the creator of the great YouTube channel Pursuit of Wonder. We are honored to have him today because he just started showing his face on camera, so this is a big deal. And he is a brilliant creator. He talks a lot about existential issues, philosophies, ideologies, and he really makes you think. Some of his videos have deeply changed my life. So we get into some very deep issues. We talk about philosophies that are life enhancing and those that lead to despair. So without further ado, let's talk to Robert. Robert Pantano, great to see you, man.
You as well. Thank you for having me.
So you are Pursuit of Wonder.
I am.
The man, the myth, the legend behind the channel. You are the sole creator of this amazing channel, Pursuit of Wonder, with well over 3 million followers. And it's had a major impact on my life. So it's an honor to talk to you.
Likewise, I appreciate that. After school has had a similar effect on me. And it's been a really wonderful, profound journey to watch both our channels over the last several years do what they've done. So I appreciate you having me.
Thanks. Yeah, when did you begin your channel?
It would have been somewhere around 9 years ago now. So whatever year that maths out to be. I think something like 2017. Yeah, I started a little bit slow and then gradually kind of picked up cadence. And then once things started clicking, just went full force.
Yeah, I definitely relate to that. I started mine almost 10 years ago. And it seems like our channels have been on a similar trajectory. And I was just going through your comments right before this, and it's amazing to see the feedback you get, the amount of comments saying that your videos mean so much to people. You know, you constantly see meaning. It's a big part of the comment section in your videos. So it seems like you're having an impact deeply on people's lives that it's far beyond, your typical YouTube video.
Yeah, I appreciate you noting that. That's what I'm striving for, obviously. You don't start and seek out a YouTube channel with difficult topics to explore and write about because it's the easiest path toward success and viability anywhere, especially on YouTube. So my goal is always has always been to create content that, if I was on the other end of the screen, would matter to me more than just in the moment. So the fact that people experience that and note that, especially at the scale that it seems to be, is frankly hard to grasp. It's something you get to a point where resonance and scale exceed comprehension, which in this case is a good thing. But it's profound, it's humbling, and it's very rewarding. It's really, I couldn't ask for anything more. I'm incredibly grateful, and it's in moments of creative uncertainty and tribulations in life, it's something that can really bring me back down as far as an anchor to the earth.
That's great. Are there any messages that kind of stand out in your mind that stand out, that had a major impact?
Yeah, there's tons of kinds of comments and just all sorts of people that have found comfort or clarity or simply consolation in the fact that their thoughts are mirrored in other people's heads. Those kinds of comments affect me deeply. But one thing that I experienced recently that was very affecting was, for the first time, I actually met people in person. So I had a small book tour alongside the release of my new book. And I went to bookstores to meet people and sort of do Q&As and readings and all that. And seeing people face to face describe, various periods of their life in which my work has helped them in whatever way it might have been, really, really moved me and affected me in a way that I wasn't prepared for. It's this reciprocation of meaning where the creative process, the creative act, the exploration of ideas, one person can perhaps provide that to an audience, to a person, and then that person's response can provide it back to the creator. And seeing that in person, human to human, like I said, was deeply profound. So just the fact that people have cared at all about anything I've written or made is impressive. If you asked me 10 years ago if that was going to be the case, I would have hoped so, but that's not how life works. You never know how things are going to pan out. But the fact that so many people have in such deep ways, like I said, is it's hard to comprehend. But in those little moments when I do comprehend it, it makes it all worth it.
That's great. Congratulations on the book tour.
Thank you.
I heard you say that your channel was born out of a rejection from the publishers.
That's correct.
And I'm very thankful that they did reject you.
Yeah. Me too.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny how life is, where something that seems bad in the moment can lead to another door opening. So yeah, it's maybe you can explain that better than I did, but you basically got rejected by every publisher in the beginning, right?
That's correct. Yeah. Essentially the gist of it is I had written a manuscript, sort of based around similar topics that I have and continue to explore on the Pursuit of Wonder YouTube channel. It was structured as a book, and I pitched it to agents and publishers for, quite a while. And the response was generally either no response or, who are you? This sort of book only works when there's a platform, a known name, or something really, specifically unique about it, which I had none of at the time. And I felt I had something worthwhile. Obviously, that's why I made it in the first place. And so I didn't want to just give up there and let it, let the dream die, let the work die. So yeah, I divided up essentially the book's manuscript into sections that I thought would be viable for YouTube videos. And that was the start of Pursuit of Wonder, is sort of these chunks of chapters and sections created into video essays that I used, whatever video editing production knowledge I had to basically brute force my way to some sort of distribution method. And then, like I said, it was a slow start, but that was something. I got a taste of the possibility of having my work out in the world and people seeing it. And I just kept going. That's
great. And now you've kind of taken that next step where you showed your face for the first time very recently. And I thought that was for an anonymous channel to come forward and show your face. I feel like that's a big deal because I'm kind of in the same boat. So what compelled you to finally show your face?
A couple factors. One of the biggest factors, which I know you'll probably resonate with, is just the influx of AI-based content and channels based around AI content, which can make, people are already cynical and skeptical in this world. You add the uncertainty around whether or not anybody cared at all about what they made and whether or not it's spam, all that, your opportunity to connect with the potential viewer or reader gets slimmer and slimmer and harder. And, that's something that I prefer anonymity and privacy, but I'm not willing to sort of bow down to an influx of AI slop, if you will. I'd rather signal humanity, protect humanity, claim humanity, and showcase that, be transparent about what's behind my work in the channel. And so that's one aspect. Another aspect is frankly trying to evolve as a writer and a creator. You can sort of mask fear with anonymity and mystique for a certain period of time, but you get to an age and a point where you decide whether or not you want to sort of confront the world head on as a person and as a thinker and as a creator. And that's the decision I thought, was right for me. And so it's both the media landscape, viewership, sort of sentiment around AI and just general consuming habits, and then also just wanting to take a position on what, who I want to be as a writer and creator. And that's a human that moves forward as that person behind a real name, a real face, and a real trajectory.
Yeah, that's very powerful. I think the irony of AI is that it's forcing us to become human. We're like figuring out, okay, wait, what does it mean to be a human? For the last couple hundred years, we've been treating humans more and more like machines, and we're just, you're getting more and more alienated from work that actually means something, where you see the fruits of your labor. You're just this cog on a machine on an assembly line, or you're just copying and pasting numbers from one spreadsheet and putting them in another. It's really dehumanizing labor. And I feel like AI is taking over all these things that are just mundane, repetitive, and it's forcing us to get in touch with, okay, what can we do that machines can't do? And I like how you've leaned into that, and I've seen other creators leaning into that. I'm trying to lean into it as well. Like, I felt it was important for me to come forward and at least show the behind the scenes of me making the art, because I've seen this like troubling trend of more and more people who think that my videos are AI. And I'm like, no, they've always been me drawing on an actual physical whiteboard with dry erase pens. Everything's hand drawn. But every video, there's more and more comments. And I'm just like, yeah, something has to be done, right?
Yeah, I mean, I share in that experience. I mean, to hit on that last point, I've also noticed the increasing frequency of comments around. Obviously, they're not regular viewers. They're not viewers or readers that are inclined to already be aware of the context of my work. But I do see an increasing frequency across my work and other people's work that I know for a fact is not AI, in which people are questioning, or even the worst part is not, is this AI, but this is AI, when it is in fact not. There's nothing more devastating from a creative person's perspective when you put in countless hours hand drawing on a whiteboard, or hand drawing on a piece of paper, or handwriting, whatever it might be. Nothing more devastating than to have people definitively declare your work has been as being generated by a machine in a second. So yeah, that's frustrating and devastating in some respects, but also inevitable. And so, like you said, you have to figure out how you reclaim your authorship, reclaim your humanity, and you can't be too stubborn, because if you think you're going to exist in your silo of unaffectedness forever as technology advances, you're probably going to suffer some consequences. So you have to either join it or you have to resist it in a very clear way. Obviously, in our cases, we're trying to be transparent while maintaining the particular method and craft that we've established. So it's up to, I guess, an audience to decide what they care to engage in.
Yeah, it's a delicate balance. You kind of have to share who you are a little bit, but you don't want to put yourself out there too much because it's risky. So you kind of want to manage that risk. Like, you don't want to put your whole family online for them to be, people do sick things. So you got to think about that. But then if you hide too much, people are like, what's going on here? They want to know a little bit. They need some context.
I think that's really well put. I do think that, to your point, there are certain types of content and creators that, for better or for worse, kind of inevitably involve a lot of their personal life, a lot of their family life, home life. And I see that as, it seems low risk, but even just like a Instagram influencer that has their 3-year-old child and 7-year-old child and their wife or husband or whatever it might be in all their content in their house all the time, that seems super innocent and low risk. But I do find that to be kind of extraordinarily high risk to always have the world welcomed into your home. And so, going all the way on that end is concerning to me. But going all the way on the other end, where you're just, you're never a part of your work at all, there's no face, there's no name, it's not concerning at all, but there's a risk to the viability of how you're going to be able to endure the continual sort of evolution of technology.
Yeah, well, I'm really glad that you came out and showed your face. I think it's going to open doors, and I'm thankful that you're here on the podcast today. Before this podcast, I was thinking about your videos that have had a really big impact on my life. And one stands out. It's called "Every Person is Just One Choice Away from Everything Changing."
Yeah.
And I don't know what that video, I think about it all the time. And every time I have a big decision to make, I think about that video and I rewatch it all the time, because it's trying to make a choice is like a heavy burden. And it's very easy to want to push away that burden and say, okay, you make a choice for me. Or, it's going to be easier if I just flip a coin and just go with that, go to chance. But that video was really about how you kind of need to own your own decisions and step into this river and just live with where that carries you in a way. And yes, you're going to have regrets, but as long as you make it your decision, you own it in a way. I don't know if I explained that very well, but that video had a very profound impact on me.
Yeah, you explained it beautifully, perhaps better than I would have if you asked me to. So, yeah, and I appreciate you sharing that. It's funny that you said that video because before you said it, I knew you were going to say that video.
Oh, really?
The reason why I know that or knew that is because I get that a lot. And if anyone ever asks me, what's the one video, the one story, the one piece of work that you are most proud of what it's done, it's that video. It always comes up, and I always feel the most connected to it. So whatever it is that particular story obviously worked. But yeah, I really appreciate it. And you summed it up, like I said, beautifully. It's about multiple things, one of them being the nature of decision-making, the nature of regret, and the inevitability of things not working out as you intended, but having to basically move forward and live with your decision. And the only thing you could have really derived meaning from is the fact that the decision was what you decided for yourself for your own reasons, not offshooting your reasoning for the decision making to somebody else or something else. So it's authenticity, it's the sort of absurdity of regret, and it's the anxiety of decision making, all kind of baked into one story. And yeah, and I, like I said, I appreciate the fact that that resonated with you in that way, and it does seem to have that video affected people in that way quite a bit.
Did you think of that story yourself?
Yes, of course.
Wow.
Yeah, everything on Pursuit of Wonder is 100%. I mean, there's like very, very, very 9-year-old videos where it's Carl Sagan intercutting voiceovers with Carl Sagan. Obviously, that's not me. Everything else is 100% my story, my original essay, my original everything. There's nobody else writing, nobody else I'm deferring to, and I'm not, referencing any sort of previously written material.
That's amazing. Maybe we could quickly explain to the audience, like, what that video is about, like the story that you created.
Sure. It's been a while, so you'll have to forgive any discrepancies here, but something along the lines of it's an individual character, a young character named Carl. He's in his, we'll call it late teens, early 20s, and he's had a dream with his best friend to start a business and move to Australia. Like ever since early high school, that's been their dream. And but life happens, and he's been presented with a more stable life, a more stable route. He's started dating a girl, and he has the opportunity to go to college and explore, like I said, a more stable career path. And when his friend presents like his initiative, I'm actually going to go through with this. I'm doing something in Australia. I'm going to start this business. Here's the business plan. Here's what I'm going to do. Here's why, blah, blah, blah. He presents that to Carl, and Carl has to decide, is he going to pursue his lifelong dream in a high-risk situation that has nothing but uncertainty, or is he going to pursue the more conservative, but still a rewarding path of a life with his girlfriend, stateside, a stable career as far as a career can be stable. And of course, he's in love with his girlfriend, and his girlfriend doesn't want to move to Australia, is not interested in a lifestyle like that. So it's sort of all these binaries get presented to him at once, where there's nothing clear about any answer. There's no right answer. He genuinely wants this life in Australia and this business, and he loves his best friend in the way a friend loves a best friend. But he also loves his girlfriend in the way you love your girlfriend, and he also loves his life that he has, in the United States. And so he can't make a decision, and he starts to ask everybody he knows, his father, his friends, his other friends, his cousins, his aunts, his uncles, everybody he can ask that he thinks has anything to say, he asks. And they all tell him different things. They all say, you should go to Australia, or you should go to, you should stay here. It's essentially might as well be an equal 50-50 split for advice. So after asking everybody, he's still left with nothing in the form of clarity. And so then he goes on a big long walk, and I'm going to give away, I'll spoil it. So I'm assuming anybody who has either seen it already won't care, and who is interested will watch it and still derive something from it. But he goes on a long walk, and to try and make a final decision by himself, and he falls asleep on a bench. And an old man wakes him up, and he asks the old man what he should do. The old man tells him to do one thing, and he decides he's going to do what that old man said. That's just, he can't make a decision for himself. He's going to do what that old man said. The old man tells him to go or stay in America and stay with his girlfriend and pursue the conservative path. And so he does that, and his life continues on, and he finds himself not regretting his life, but wondering what could have been, recognizing the difficulties and the pains and sufferings that he still experiences in his life. And so he goes on a big, long walk, 10, 20, 30 years old, 20, 30 years later, to try to reflect on his life. And I'm missing quite a few important pieces here, but he essentially falls asleep on a bench and wakes up, and an old man, he's younger again, and an old man asks him, or talks with him, and he asks the old man what he should do. And so then we go the opposite direction. The old man tells him to go to Australia. He goes to Australia, and a bunch of things happen, good things, bad things. 20, 30 years later, he finds himself wondering what life would have been like if he went the other direction, longing for, the understanding of what that could have been, because his current life has a lot of problems, a lot of pains and sufferings. And so he goes on a big, long walk, falls asleep on a bench, and wakes up and essentially realizes that there's no right path. It's the path that he claims for himself, for his own reasons, not, like I said, offshooting his decision to a parent, a friend, a societal expectation, and certainly not a random old man on a random path on the side of the street. And so in life, you're going to find yourself faced with such significant decisions that are going to affect everything. If you move to one place or another, even if it's a different state, whatever it might be, taking a job, not taking a job, dating somebody, breaking up with somebody, all these decisions are going to affect the trajectory of your life significantly and forever thereafter. And they neither, in most of these cases, neither option is an obvious. I mean, there are some cases, obviously, where there are obvious, this is better, this is worse, but there are so many where the factors are unforeseeable. They're too malleable. They're too nebulous. You can't do like a calculus about them. And so you can become paralyzed. And when you make one decision, you fast forward the clock, you can become paralyzed again by the regret of, see, this life didn't work out the way I wanted it, exactly the way I wanted it to. And so therefore, I feel like maybe I made the wrong decision. But none of that is really the right way in my mind to look at these decision-making processes and life paths. You make the decision as best you can, given the information you have, and then you stick with it, and you move forward. And when you come to a frame of mind that inspires regret, it's totally natural, but you have to remind yourself that there's no way you could know what the other path or any of the other paths would have equated to, and there's no path in life that was going to go according to your plans, and it was going to be free from suffering, anxiety, problems, all of the things we hope that will remove from life entirely. But we'll never remove those things from life, and so your best bet is to move forward through a path that is as authentic to your own reasoning as possible, and to embrace your circumstances in every moment that you can.
Yeah, I love that so much. And that probably, of all the videos I've seen on YouTube, that one had the biggest impact on me. And every time I'm confronted with a big decision, you can feel crippled. You can feel like you're being pulled in a million directions, and it's like it's paralysis by analysis, right? And that's just the worst, the indecision. And so ever since watching that video, I've been able to make decisions and just live with it with a sense of peace of mind. So it really changed my life in a big way. And because overthinking is just so crippling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's hard to escape.
You can just analyze things endlessly. I mean, there's an infinite number of variables around every decision, and you could get advice from the most brilliant minds on the planet, and that still won't bring you clarity. So at a certain point, you just need to be true to yourself and just, okay, what's my intuition telling me? What's my logic telling me? What feels right? And I'm going to step forward and just own this decision.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's less about objective rightness and wrongness and more about the willingness to, like you said, own it, move forward and own it, and essentially, for lack of a better word, move on. Because, yeah, the paralysis of decision making and then subsequently regret, like I said, is understandable, but it essentially serves no purpose. Your best bet is to figure out your how can you exist through each moment, doing your best, making the decisions you can with the information you have, but not becoming, weighed down, anchored down by overanalysis and overthinking. And that's an inherent part of being a person. So it's not to say that that's something you can just sort of wave a magic wand and stop doing. But anytime you can get a reminder, whether it's through something that you've created for yourself, a story that you've encountered, or just, whatever mechanisms you can, employ in your life, recognizing that, your best bet is, like you said, trust your intuition, move forward, own it, and then, always remember you did your best with the information you had. It can't go back. So let's take it each moment as it comes.
Exactly. Marcus Aurelius has a quote I love. He says, "A wise man accepts his pain, endures it, but does not add to it."
Mm.
So it's like the crippling anxiety of trying to make the decision. It's a lot more painful than just making the decision and embracing the consequences of that action. It's like the overthinking is far worse than any actual pain you'd experience,
Yeah, well put. Absolutely.
Yeah. So, this kind of makes me think about free will. Within that video, there's an essence of free will at play. And it's almost like the character in that story, Carl, wants to say, you know what, this free will is too much of a burden for me to handle. I want to just be a leaf in the wind. I want to be a product of fate. Let fate decide what happens to me. But I really liked how you brought it back to, like, there's a hint of free will there. And I'd love to get your opinion on, like, do people have free will? Like, what's your take on free will?
So from a purely philosophical level, I don't believe people have free will. But that doesn't negate what you just said, at least in my view. We are going to live as if we have free will. We're going to engage with information and people and the world as if we have free will. The illusion is so real that even the knowledge of it being an illusion, or at least the belief in it being illusion, changes nothing about your life. So on a sort of, fundamental philosophical level, I don't believe people have free will. But on the level of relevance, when it comes to engaging in these kinds of ideas, that need not enter the frame. It's an interesting philosophical debate. There's actually a lot of ethical implications of that debate, in my view. But when it comes to concerns around decision-making and regret, concerns around, how you handle your perspective in life, free will can sort of percolate underneath things and maybe be relevant, but for the most part, I don't think it's super relevant to bring into the equation. But if you were to ask me plainly, in the way that we really think or describe free will, I don't believe we have free will. We are, in my mind, a product. There's a few ways of thinking about it. I don't. Do you want to get into a little bit of the nitty gritty of free will, or would you rather sort of sidestep that?
No, let's get into the nitty gritty.
Sure. There's a few ways you could think about the actual arguments around free will or the lack thereof. One is determinism, which assumes everything in the universe is a product of cause and effect. And that means, if one thing happens, that causes that there's an interaction and that causes another thing to happen. And from our perspective, it seems like the universe is that. Everything seems to be a product of interactions where one thing does something and another thing does something in a reaction. And so if everything is that, including the brain, including humans, animals, everything, then everything is a product, including thoughts, including decisions, of a previous interaction that essentially preceded your own existence. You didn't decide your birth, you didn't decide your first perception, your first thought, but yet your birth, your first perception, your first thought, and everything thereafter, and all your environmental experiences affected intricately everything that you've thought and done since. So there's no moment where, from what I can tell, you step out of that causal chain and suddenly say, I'm here now separate from everything that's made me. I'm deciding or doing something differently. So that's the deterministic argument. There's also, people might bring up quantum mechanics and the apparent acausal relationship between quantum particles and a certain randomness. And so there seems to be a non-causal relationship between things at a quantum level, where you could say maybe consciousness has some relation to that, some quantum level. And that may or may not be true, but I don't see free will arriving in randomness either. You don't just, if it's random, then there's no decision making, there's no will of the mind. It's sort of an arriving of quantum nothingness or randomness. So, and then the third is, there's some sort of religious entity, God bestows free will upon the mind and intervenes with reality, or cajoles reality according to a certain plan, which still just pushes back the decision making that isn't yours to a God. So there could be more options there, but those tend to be the main arguments against free will, or against or for surrounding free will, that seem to me to be insufficient to prove free will, and in fact, seem to support a lack of free will. So most of those arguments have been made many times, going back to, sort of Arthur Schopenhauer philosophers, and Sam Harris does a very good job presenting the arguments around a lack of free will. But like I said, the ethical implications of a lack of free will are important, I think, but your experience of day-to-day life, in the same way, like if I say, I think there's no objective meaning to the universe, there's no objective meaning to life, that doesn't mean I don't find meaning in friendships and relationships and art and what I do for work. Like, there's the illusion of the sort of subjectiveness of meaning is enough to make me get up in the morning and care about everything I do. And the illusion of free will is enough to make me consider my decision making, evaluate my responses to the world, all those things. So despite it being an illusion, it's an illusion in the way that if you watch a magic show, you're still enthralled by it. You're still captivated by the mystery and the wonder of the experience, and you play along. You're not behind the scenes. You don't know the mechanics of everything, and so you're still in the audience. You're still observing it all. You're still participating in the wonder. So there's a couple ways you can interpret the argument around there. But like I said, I find it interesting, but not necessarily needed in the actual application of various sort of decision making and responsibilities in life.
That was very well explained. I think this idea of free will gets to the core of people's core beliefs. And you're almost seeing this as part of the polarization in our world, in our politics, in our ideologies today. You have but I don't think it's either one or the other. I feel like both can be true at the same time. Like, you are a product of your environment, but your environment is also a product of you. And to what degree is kind of up to you. Carl Jung famously said, "I am not what happened to me. I am what I choose to become." He was kind of rejecting being this leaf in the wind blowing. He said, no. Yes, I am a leaf in the wind blowing, but yes, I can also steer the course of where I go from here on out. And I feel like it is valuable to hold both these two at the same time, because in certain cases, you can see that somebody is a product of their environment and they are a victim of all these cause and effects that they didn't choose. And it's not really helpful to just point your finger and say, you're responsible for what you've done. You're bad. No, it's like, this person has horrible genetics and horrible parents, and they're from a long line of abused tribes, and they didn't choose any of that. So it's not helpful to blame them for these things that they didn't have any part of. But at the same time, I feel like it's very, on an individual level, I feel like it's debilitating to go through life just thinking that you're not in control of anything. You don't have responsibility. You don't have a say in what goes on because it all just happens to you. And you're just this product of what happens to you. So I feel like on an individual level, it can be very useful to, even if you know it's an illusion, to act in a way where you have free will. And like you said, you get up in the morning, you make those friendships meaningful. It's up to you to make them meaningful. Life is not going to just serve you a silver platter and say, here's your meaning. You got to go out and get the meaning, right?
Yeah. And the sort of paradox or irony there is, I don't believe you have a choice, even if you are somebody who believes or recognizes the illusion of free will. You are, by the very nature of your lack of free will, going to still continue to be compelled to care, to try, to forge meaning, and to make decisions according to what feels authentic to you. And by the very nature of being a human, our condition of consciousness sort of widens the curtains so we get a sense that it is perhaps a magic show of sorts. But like I said, we have no choice by the very nature of our consciousness and our condition in reality with a lack of free will to continue to care, to try, and to feel as if everything we do matters. And so I'm somebody who, if you really whittle everything down, I see everything as sort of there's no inherent meaning to existence, at least on an objective level. There's no free will. Good and bad is a sort of a projection of a anthropocentric view of the world. But yet I get up every morning and I love and I care and I try. I forge meaning. I make the best decisions I can. I am as kind as I can be to every person I encounter, from a stranger to a partner to a family member. So there's no discrepancy. There's no contradiction in recognizing like there's a sort of illusory participation in the whole show and caring as much as anybody humanly can about doing it and participating as best as you can.
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we're not going to get out of the illusion because we're here living life. So you might as well live within the illusion a little bit. I mean, embrace the illusion. It's kind of like, do you want to go your whole life without ever getting seduced once? Right. It's like, oh, I know what's happening. You're trying to seduce me. No, I mean, fall in love, get seduced.
Yeah.
Experience the breadth of life.
Yeah, well put. I mean, that's a good example. Actually, I appreciate that example because there's something so simple about being seduced and seduction, but it's representative of I think the human relationship with the condition of itself, the sort of self-awareness that we possess in relation to the condition of reality. We are seduced by life in every moment in the way that you just put it. So that's actually a really cogent analogy.
Thanks. And your recent book, The Paradox of Self-Awareness, the terrible paradox of self-awareness, I think this is quite relevant to what we're talking about now. I think about people who are like blissfully ignorant, and maybe you can get too self-aware and you can look at those people and envy them and be like, oh, I wish I could just eat an apple without knowing about all the pesticides or something. Like this is a paradox where it's like, how do you balance the tension? You want to be self-aware, but can you get too self-aware where you're like punishing yourself?
Yeah, it's a difficult one because I think people experience self-awareness and their relationship with themselves and just their own modes of thought quite differently. And so it's difficult to prescribe, a sort of universalized sense of, this is the right level of self-awareness. If you're starting to feel this way, it's too far, or this way, it's too little. That zone can be challenging to engage with for me. But I think that once you start to become, like you're going to start asking questions, if you're watching this or whatever it is that you might encounter in relation to this kind of content, you're already sort of interested in questions about what it means to be a person, what life is made of, how to do things right, all that. So you're already down the rabbit hole that self-awareness propels you into in the more extreme depths of the term. And I think once you're on that journey, it's actually better to just full steam ahead it. You can't really dial it back. Like, you're going to be somebody with a certain degree of concern or consideration about ideas and questions, and you can't pretend to not be that person. And so your best bet at that point is to figure out how to deal with being that kind of person who asks those more granular questions and those more difficult questions, or experiences a certain proximity to yourself and your thoughts that can be kind of convoluted. And for some people, that might mean there's a sort of methodology that, maybe there's a more clinical practice that you might engage in. For other people, it might be working through a sort of philosophical practice, a sort of embrace or acceptance and exploration of ideas, a sense that you're not weird for feeling the way you feel, and the intensity of your feelings are normal, or at least shared amongst a giant percentage of the population. So there's a certain inevitability when it comes to the kind of self-awareness you find yourself in. And I'm not sure if this is exactly what you're getting at, but I would say that there's probably a fair argument to be made. The further the dial goes down for self-awareness and awareness in general, the easier things might get. I think if you could turn it all the way down to the point in which you never even ask the question about, is being this self-aware good or bad? Am I happy? What does it mean? Is ignorance bliss? If none of those questions ever arise for you, then you're probably closer to the states that you would want to be at. Because I'm paraphrasing here, but there's a David Foster Wallace quote that goes something like, am I happy is the kind of question that in asking it kind of dictates its own answer. If you have to ask, am I happy? You're probably not. And so anytime you have to start considering the degree or level of your happiness, your bliss, how close you are to your thoughts, or all those things, then you're maybe further away than somebody who never even thought to ask that question. The more you dissect these experiences and these concepts, the less discernible they are from an experiential level. So there's sort of an unfortunate tragic element there, where once you start dissecting it, they don't cleanly go back together. But there's wonder, and there's this enthralling experience in examining yourself and your thoughts and the questions you have. Even if they are unanswerable, even if they are challenging, they become your bliss. You have to transmute them. If you have to ask the question, then you're already on the starting line. We got to finish the race. We got to go the whole distance. And I find that deriving wonder from the exploration of yourself, the exploration of the difficulties of life, the absurdities of life, the challenges of life, are not easy, but they invoke enough experience of wonder and a sort of catharsis and a communing with existence that make it worthwhile. So that's sort of a long-winded way of saying, if you're on the end of the spectrum of self-awareness where you start to explore these things, it's too late to go back, but there's plenty of runway to go forward and experience a life that is still riveting, worthwhile, and pleasant enough.
Yeah, it reminds me of the stages of becoming really good at something. First you have ignorance is bliss. You don't even know that you suck at something. And then all of a sudden your ignorance is popped and you realize, oh my God, there's a sport called basketball and I suck at it. And then that's the painful phase. And then the next painful phase is actually trying to get good at basketball, where you're consciously incompetent, but you're trying to get better. You're practicing. You have to focus really hard on making the basketball in the hoop. But then you get to a level where you're unconsciously competent. You can close your eyes and just, where the hoop is, and your wrist knows the perfect action. You can gauge the velocity of the ball perfectly, and it goes in every time, and you don't even have to think about it. That's the level where you're blissfully competent. It's like the opposite end of the ignorance is bliss. So yes, it is painful to become aware of yourself at first, but it doesn't have to end with the pain. You can take it further and go to this point where it's awesome. And I'm thinking of like Carl Jung here, and like all the work that he did around our shadow side. And just simple quotes from Carl Jung, like, everything that irritates us about others can lead to an understanding of ourselves. Before somebody would cut me off in traffic and I'd get so mad. But now they cut me off and I say, why did that upset me? Is it because I'm already late? Is it because I'm always running late? Is it because my parents were always late to, you can trace it back and then you can go, oh, and it's like that wonder you're talking about where you can kind of be astonished at your own flaws and your own elements of your personality that instead of getting attached to them and freaking out, you can observe them and with that awareness and be like, oh, that makes sense. Yeah. So it's a nice little distance there.
Yeah. Yeah. Very well put. I think the key point that you brought up there is you still might have moments of anger or anxiety or pain, whatever it might be. The point isn't to absolve yourself and your life from those experiences. It's to create that distance, like you said, and to exist in that distance between phenomena and thought and reaction. And in that distance is awareness, and you have an opportunity to filter those experiences mentally and externally through that sort of, it's kind of an obscure idea, but there's this little buffer of awareness where you can filter those things through, and you can pad them. You can recognize where they might be coming from, and then you can differentiate them. You can either redirect them or null them based on what you feel is, according to your values. So if you're somebody who thinks anger is mostly useless when it comes to somebody accidentally, doing something in traffic, or somebody who thinks that, regret is mostly useful or useless in terms of trying to ruminate on what you could have done better. These all, in that space of awareness, you can essentially redefine and reclaim ownership over your reaction and your situation. So yeah, I think that's like you said, that's a very important, valuable reframing of experience if you can get there. And to get there, you have to go through the entire bell curve of that sort of experiential learning and flailing, the sort of Dunning-Kruger curve, if you will.
There's another paradox. It's like when I go through the videos of your channel, there's so many paradoxes that you've uncovered. Have you found that most of these deep existential questions lead to a paradox answer?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for better or for worse, I do find that if you dig deep enough, you hit bedrock, and that bedrock is paradox, or at the very least, it's some sort of like strange, inconclusive irony. But for the most part, yeah, I think all knowledge and all meaning and established ideas do have an inherent sort of fundamental paradoxical nature to them. There's a trilemma called the Münchhausen trilemma, which is it's by, I forget his first name, but obviously his last name is Münchhausen, and he argues that all knowledge is based on a trilemma of essentially what equate to not exactly paradoxes, but insufficient reasoning. And so the first part is that everything is either, there's three layers. One is everything is circular, everything is an infinite regress, or everything is dogmatic. So, for example, circular would be, somebody asks, why is the Bible true? The Bible is true because it's the Word of God. Well, why does the Word of God make the Bible true? Well, because it's in the Bible. Sort of, you have a circular reasoning there. Infinite regress might be, why does the earth exist? The earth exists because of a sequence of, matter coalescing in the universe. Well, why does matter coalesce in the universe? Well, because it was produced through a series of events that, go back to the Big Bang. Well, why did the Big Bang happen? And then you sort of hit a wall there, but essentially you could just kind of keep asking why questions. Dogmatic reasoning might be, why is the sky blue? Well, because the great spaghetti monster in the sky, projects blue onto why is that? Well, because the great spaghetti monster said so. It's sort of just a hard line. And so if you think about knowledge, any fact we think we know, it's hard to imagine any situation where there wouldn't be one of those three in terms of the formation of knowledge. And so if everything we think we know and we believe and we engage in informationally is more or less based on some basis of either circular reasoning, and I'm not saying this is true, I just think there's something interesting here, circular reasoning, infinite regress, or dogmatic belief, then you do start to hit up against a kind of paradox, a kind of futility in truth and knowledge that can be concerning to many, but invoking of wonder to some, and I'd be the latter. I think it's really fascinating to think about how much we've been able to do as a species despite like clarity around any foundational knowledge.
That's a really interesting idea. It's called Münchhausen's trilemma.
Münchhausen trilemma. Yeah.
So it's circular reasoning is like, why is there a chicken? Because of an egg. Why is there an egg? Because of a chicken. Then you have infinite regress, which is, it's like a little kid saying, why are we going here? Because we got to get your teeth clean. Well, why do I have to get my teeth clean? Because they get dirty. Like, you just go on forever.
Exactly.
And then there's like an axiom or dogma or a definitive like stopping point where you're just like, you got to get your teeth clean because God says so. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's it. That's the end of it.
And yeah, I think that's a great point, because most deep philosophical questions are going to go down one of those three lines of thinking. There's something pleasing about having an axiom that just says, all right, we're done with that. We can just put that away. We don't have to think about evolution or the beginning of the universe anymore. We can just answer that question. And it kind of reminds me of a quote I heard. I'm always going to bring up quotes, but there's a quote: God-fearing people have to explain unjust suffering in the world. Atheists have to explain everything else. So
interesting.
It kind of gets to the heart of like, religious people don't need to explain why a fish has fins or why all these things, because it's just, the answer is God for everything.
Right.
But then if God created everything, then why does a little kid get cancer? Why is there unjust suffering? That's one of the more difficult questions to answer. We can get into that. But then the atheist feels like they have to explain every other thing, because if it's not God, then it's like that infinite regress of explanations. Yeah.
Or you could opt out of feeling like you need to explain, because this is the camp I sit in, which would be, I want to explore possible explanations, but I actually don't know if I feel the need to ultimately, objectively explain everything. I see that as entirely from a human perspective, from the fact that we are limited to the clump of our brain matter and will always exist within that. No matter what tools we have, we'll always filter them through the final tool of our brain. Even if we augment it, there's still the limitation of what it means to experience subjectivity from inside something. I see ultimate objective explanation and meaning and truth being sort of a futile endeavor if your dependency is on resolving everything. I see it as a really beautiful endeavor just by the fact that I like watching stuff that makes me feel a part of a bigger picture and experience wonder. And so I like exploring explanations to things. And obviously I'm putting aside sort of moral and legal quandaries here. I'm just talking more metaphysical stuff. I like exploring those things, not because I'm depending on how to justify everything, how to explain everything, but because it's so profound how we could ask such questions and yet be so far away from ever having any idea. And there's just sort of an infinite landscape of possibility to explore there. And I intend on walking it as long as I'm alive.
That's a great way of approaching things. And it seems like the answer is not really what we want. It's like the pursuit of getting to the answer, which is the fun part.
Yeah, like, absolutely.
Where everybody's like, what's in the Epstein files? What's in the Epstein files? If we just got the files incomplete and we got all the answers tomorrow, we'd be like, huh. Okay. But it's almost like the mystery of like, all right, well, what was really going on? Or like,
yeah,
maybe a weird example.
It's a timely example, and the fact that it is, the Epstein files have endured the sort of front page for as long as they have because of what you just brought up. Obviously, it's horrific what I could assume is going on or went on and is in there, but the endurance of the horrificness is because it's been sort of this continual sort of like, what is it, what might it be, why is this that way, why is this way. It's the fact that it's sort of breeding these uncertainties and questions that perpetuates its central nature of concern in culture. So yeah, I mean, good example or not, it makes the point. It makes the point that we continually want to be able to feed on uncertainty. And as soon as we feel like we have ultimate resolution in the form of anything, whether that's, I mean, if you believe that your answer to everything is God, power to you. But for me, there's something that's limiting in that. There's something that makes me, stop questioning things. And as somebody who has, built a life around figuring out how to healthily ask questions about everything, that would be a very trivial existence to just always have a similar answer for everything.
Yeah, I think it's totally my personal view. I think it's fine to explore as many philosophies as you want. You can read any religious text. You can do whatever you want, but that is not there's a difference between entertaining an idea and accepting it. Like, I can entertain many ideas, but I don't have to make that like my core moral compass. But bringing it to the core moral compass, what philosophies or ideologies have you found in your own personal life have been the most beneficial?
So for a moral compass, this isn't the best answer, or it's not a bad answer, but it's probably not the best segue. But the philosophy that I resonate the most with just on a day-to-day basis, if I had to pick one, would be absurdism. Absurdism is a philosophy popularized by Albert Camus. It preceded Albert Camus, but he was sort of the individual who brought it to the forefront and helped define it. And it essentially helps frame humanity's absurd condition with existence in the universe as a meaning, truth-seeking entity, despite what seems to be a largely incoherent, meaningless, at least in the terms humanity seeks for it, universe. And so absurdism establishes what Camus refers to as the revolt, which is sort of responding to the futility of existence with defiant joy. And so you recontextualize your experience and you figure out how to make joy out of the nothingness. You don't seek hope. You don't seek an afterlife. You seek a moment-to-moment defiant joy in whatever way you can. You reclaim ownership over your circumstances, and you find in that pocket of awareness how you can establish values. So Camus often, he refers to this. One of the famous things he utilizes in his definition of absurdism is the myth of Sisyphus. And so that's a Greek king who's essentially been condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill for it to only roll back down as soon as he nears the top over and over for eternity. And his claim is that, more or less, I'm adding my own sort of philosophical interpretation on top of this, but if Sisyphus accepts his condition and figures out how he can sort of observe his reality with the distance between his condition and his awareness, he can redefine his experience of that condition by orienting it toward his values. So if he values something like wonder or creativity or kindness or whatever it might be, he can spend his entire eternal existence trying to observe every aspect of the landscape with as much intricacy and in every way he possibly can imagine. And that could fulfill his existence. That could provide a certain defiant joy. He could try to create shaping out of the way he rolls the rock and create art eternally. And that could create it. He could sort of meditate with each push, and he could sort of relinquish a sense of control. And it's, each push and each breath could be a kind of mantra toward no longer caring about the orientation of his goal. Or he could, try to ensure he doesn't harm any creatures on the hill as he rolls the boulder. The point being is he could choose any of these paths only after he accepts the fact that he is eternally rolling this boulder up a hill, and then reclaims ownership. And in that pocket of awareness, through a sort of defiant joy, he can pick, a way in which he no longer tries to resist the situation. And so a long-winded answer to the fact that, like, I think that for me, absurdism is a way of engaging with the futility of truth and meaning and ideas and the illusions of existence while never succumbing to them. I still have this pocket of awareness where I have values, and I still push the boulder in my own way in any given moment, and I still feel like once it goes to the bottom, I'm running back down to get it back up to the top because there's something I derive from it, whatever that might be. So absurdism for me is a philosophy that I find very potent. That's putting aside sort of moral. I'm not going to get in. I'm not educated enough on sort of the various moral, meta-ethical philosophies to speak on them cogently enough that I would feel comfortable with. But I will say more broadly, one thing I think about philosophy in terms of its use is I see philosophy oftentimes more as music than a system, than a sort of rational order of thought. What I mean by that is, music makes me, when I listen to a good song, it makes me feel like I'm a part of something bigger. It answers the impossible through a feeling, through a sense of just communing with the human spirit, despite everything else that we're enduring. And so philosophy, for me, the most potent experiences of philosophy that I've read or engaged in have been similar. They more have been a harmony of thought, a communing with a sense of kinship around experiencing ideas or pains. And whatever philosophy, whatever writer, whatever creator does that for somebody, I think that is of immense use. It doesn't have to be a system, doesn't have to be systematized, rational structuring of sort of, premise one, premise two. It can simply be like, I read this chapter or I watched this video and it made me feel like something is worth feeling and experiencing and continuing on for. And that, if philosophy does that at all for anybody, that's the kind of philosophy that person should pursue.
That's a great point. And I think music is a very nice bridge between philosophy. It's a good analogy because, like we were saying earlier, philosophy is not about arriving at an answer. It's kind of about the pursuit of wonder, of getting there. And, sometimes I'll listen to a podcast on like 2x speed or 1.5 speed. And then I'll switch over to music and it'll suddenly be on like 2x speed. And I'll be like, whoa, 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 whoa. And so the idea of listening to music on 2x speed is absurd because you're not trying to get to the end of the song. The point of music is not to complete the music. The point of dancing is not to finish the dance. It is the dance. And just like philosophy, it is the philosophy. It is the pursuit that really is the essence there, is in that pursuit. It's not about like getting to that final destination.
I love that. That's beautifully put.
Yeah, and I love that philosophy of absurdism. I haven't dove into it, but the way you were explaining it kind of reminds me of like, let's say you're going camping and all of a sudden it starts raining really hard and then your tent breaks and then all your food gets damaged and falls out of your car and gets all dirty. At a certain point, you stop being frustrated and you just like look up to the sky and you start laughing because you're like, this is ridiculous. Yeah. And I think, if you can hold that attitude all the time, because life is always absurd, and just be like, yeah, this is absurd. It can help you kind of tread lightly through life instead of get so weighed down by all the suffering that you endure.
Yeah, and I think that's the goal, especially once you've sort of, worked through the process of being very hyper aware and very question oriented. One of the things you need to start to incorporate in your sort of mental toolbox is how to soften the edges of the pointedness of questions and awareness. And so, a certain lightness around the intent and the dependency on questions and answers and understandings is a very useful thing to, like I said, add to that toolbox.
Yeah, one thing I think your channel embodies really well is the ethical philosophy of Immanuel Kant, where basically he tried to distill down ethics and remove all religion from it. And he got it down to basically one core sentence: do not use people as a means to an end. Only use people as an end. And I feel like so much content on YouTube now is trying to use the viewer to sell something or to just take their time and attention away from them. And what I love about your channel is like, I feel like I am the end. Like this information is coming to me to better my life. And when I walk away from that video, I feel like I've gained something. And I don't feel like I was used, basically. And so whether you are aware of it or not, I think that's a philosophy that you encompass well, that you don't use people as a means to an end. You use them as your end.
Well, I love to hear that, and I really appreciate it, because that's obviously, I'm extraordinarily sensitive to that. I have been since the beginning, and you know, I obviously have I do have sponsorships on my videos, but I'm extraordinarily sensitive to them. They're never in the video. They're always before, like a short little thing at the beginning and a short little thing at the end. I never interrupt my videos. I never do mid rolls, and I also am extraordinarily sensitive to the language I use around that sort of thing. So I really appreciate hearing that. But it's when your livelihood depends on your content, I can't fault anyone for succumbing to various whatever it might be, strategies. A lot of people are approaching obviously content from a strategy, career oriented perspective, and creativity is second, and to each their own. But yeah, it's a very difficult balance to consider yourself sort of creative artist adjacent, and then still figuring out how to make money and exist and survive off of your work. It's a very difficult tightrope walk. And I like I said, I don't fault anybody for any method they use, and I hope I'm doing it as tastefully as I possibly can.
Yeah, there's this theory about the brain that makes it very simple. It breaks the brain up into 3 different levels. This theory has kind of been disproved since it's the tri-brain theory. But basically, you have the reptilian brain at the bottom, which is your survival. Then you have the mammalian brain around that, which is like your emotions. And then you have the human brain, which is like the cortex, where you have your like conscious abstract thinking. You can think about the future. You can plan. You can really conceptualize, like in a conscious way, your wishes and desires. And I feel like your channel is of the highest level, where it appeals to the conscious mind. Whereas when you look at the landscape of videos, a lot of it is appealing to more basic, lower level survival or emotions. It's like, oh my God, I got to watch this thing right now. It's like in this moment, it hits you emotionally, and you kind of subconsciously, unconsciously click that video. And then, yeah, you waste some time. But your videos, it's different. It's like it stands out as like a more of a beacon of light amongst this sea of these unconscious manipulators, puppeteers or something. Yeah.
Yeah, especially, I mean, I've noticed it. I try to not overly engage with like short form content too much. Obviously, there's some short form content that is actually really impressive, really creative, really profound. There's nothing inherently less than about short form content, but short form content does cater more to what you're describing. And when I do find myself in a sort of black hole of short form content on whatever platform it might be, yeah, I noticed just the worst appeal to sort of base neurology, base physiology. There's such, I mean, I don't want to like call anybody out. I'm not going to name anybody, but just like you'll see people that like troll public, like whether it's employees at a department store or at a food like at a restaurant, and they'll have like a gambling app up on their phone in the front of the screen while they basically nearly assault some random employee, and they consider it a prank, and the video does numbers. I mean, it just kills on all these platforms. And so, I mean, pranking and those sorts of things are not new. It's been around since the beginning of YouTube and DVD for that matter. But the sort of widening of the scope and the viability of just kind of being an asshole is is representative of, I think, what you're referring to, where it's just this reduction of, what does this content do for anybody? Not only are the people in it being harmed, but you as a viewer are just being numbed to a sort of, you're being desensitized by the very nature of human interaction. So that's an unfortunate development in the way media is going. But anybody that can be beacons at all, in whatever way they see fit, I think it makes it all the more beautiful.
You just made me think of a potentially awesome business idea. If there was some sort of service that could make you like control your attention. Okay, I'm trying to not make this sound like ADD medication. Like, I wonder if people could like because nobody wakes up in the morning and they're like, I'm going to spend 8 hours scrolling. Like if you could wake up in the morning and like click this program on that says your attention's going to like be good for today, all that nonsense would like not even appeal to you. It'd be like Ozempic for your mind or something. I'm trying to not make it sound like ADD meds.
Well, it might seem dystopian maybe, but I actually don't see that being so far off from possibility in the mid to, not super far off future, like midterm future. I know there are ADD meds now, but more than that, Ozempic makes you not hungry. And I know ADD meds make you not, they control your, I don't know a whole lot about it, but I know they control your sort of hunger for sporadicness. But I could see something more technological being implemented that would function as if it was a sort of Ozempic of the mind. I think something like that. I'm super interested to see where we end up in 10 seems short, but I wouldn't rule it out, like 10 to 30 years, how we augment ourselves to deal with and manage the technological conditions we create for ourselves. It's going to have to change. We're either going to, step aside and accept inferiority to the world we've created, or we're going to have to integrate, and both are pretty scary.
Yeah, I mean, we're still working with this ancient biology that's hundreds of thousands of years old, and we've got this technology that plays on that biology, just like the tri-brain, where, you're trying to use your conscious mind, but if there's like a fire at your feet and you're trying to make a plan on the wall, you're going to have to pay attention to the fire first. Mm-hmm. And so a lot of what you see on social media is this urgent fire. It's hyper sexual. It's hyper violent. And you're conditioned. Your ancient biology is conditioned to look at these things because it's far more urgent to pay attention to that than to come up with a plan for your life. You can't come up with a plan while your feet are on fire. You've got to deal with one thing at a time. So I think it's just the archaeology or the architecture of our brain to prioritize these hyper sensational things. Because like if you're trying to survive, if there's a saber-toothed tiger, you got to pay attention to that first. And that's kind of how I see the landscape of YouTube and social media. Is there's certain creators that are trying to create this like beautiful conscious content, but it's very hard to compete when you're in this sea of hyper reality. Absolutely.
And to that point, the irony is our feet are not on fire. We just feel as though they are. So it's not only illusory to think that this is important for our attention, but it's totally against our better use. It's counterproductive to what would be good for us. And so I'm not in favor of just some sort of like technological augmentation around that, but the individual has to do a lot of work to get over the fact that they have to, sort of brute force their way out of their hard wiring to get away from the hyper violent, hyper sexualized, hyper attention oriented content and explore something difficult and explore something hard, or at least focus more on those things. That's extraordinarily hard, especially when the incentives of an entire system, economy and technology, are oriented toward how can we get into your skull and basically pull every thread we can and make sure we tie those knots according to our prerogative and our incentives and our goals. So it's an extraordinarily difficult thing, and we're definitely set up against our evolutionary biology, the conditions of our brain, and systems of our economy. But whether there's any sort of thing we can use to help us technologically, there's still choice to be had around, in the same way somebody diets, in the same way somebody exercises. Most people don't like any of those things, but you choose to do it because ultimately you get in the routine of it and it makes you feel better. I think we'll see more and more people exploring and living amongst a sort of diet of consumption of media. And it'll have to be something like that, or else we'll all consume ourselves along the way. I mean, I don't know how as a humanity we flourish if our primary, media diet is based around, sex, violence, and essentially fraudulent claim, as opposed to exploration of humanity and humility and ideas and hope. So I hope at least that's the case, whether it's through technological means or individual overcoming.
Yeah, this is kind of a bit off topic, but I just did a podcast about Aztec sacrifice with this archaeologist. And I was kind of like, why did they sacrifice so many people? I mean, what compelled them to sacrifice 80,000 people in a day for one ceremony? I mean, what could possibly drive them to that? And we were talking about ancient people when they were separating themselves from animals. One of the first big discoveries was the discovery of the future. Most animals don't have a concept of the future. They don't understand if they sacrifice the present, they're going to have a better future. I mean, some squirrels bury nuts and they get them later, but it's very surface level. You don't see many animals like coming up with a plan and building a community. And so I think what we were getting at with the idea of human sacrifice is that people started to learn that they could negotiate with the future by giving up something that they love now. The more painful that sacrifice is in the present, the better the future would be. And these mass human sacrifices were an extreme expression of that. But in almost every religion and spiritual tradition, there is this idea that you have to give an offering. And if that offering is fake, or it's not a very good offering, if you give God the worst cut of meat or something, he's not going to accept that. And you're going to pay for it in the future. You have to give the best sacrifice you can give, and that will lead to the good future. So I don't know, that's a little bit of a side note, but I wonder, that idea is so deeply embedded in human nature, the sacrifice, that almost everywhere you look in human populations, that idea of sacrificing now for a better future comes up in different ways.
Yeah, and it's not always obvious. There's sometimes where sacrificing now for later is maybe less optimal, less wise. And it's sort of always an equilibrium that you have to figure out what balance makes sense for you. And like I said, it's not obvious, because over saving for the future, whether that's for, with money, whether that's with hope, whether that's with, it could be any number of things. You might end up, saving and hoping your way out of any experience worthwhile at all. And then you die and you don't, who knows where you go after that, maybe nowhere. And then you gave up all worthwhile experiences now. But if you only pursue sort of a hedonistic, momentary existence, then you're almost certainly going to come up against a increasingly painful, difficult future with limited resources and a decrepit body, and perhaps even just killing yourself the day of. So yeah, there's obviously a giant spectrum there. I just described two extremes, but figuring out that equilibrium is very challenging, but very important. And I'm glad we've come a ways from feeling like we need to do any literal sacrifices of animals or humans.
Yeah, I mean, finding that balance is tough, because it makes me think of like somebody who saved up for retirement a ton of money and they died with $2 million in the bank. And it's like, hey man, you messed up. You saved up, you sacrificed too much, and you didn't experience your actual wealth in the present. And then there's the guy that didn't save up enough, and we're like, you're an idiot. You didn't sacrifice enough, and now you're going to suffer in your older years. So I guess the perfect way would be to have a lot of money and then you spend your last dollar as you're dying. Like,
Yeah. Ideally, but it's such a tiny target
yeah,
to try and hit.
yeah. It's like you're at McDonald's on your deathbed, and you're like, actually,
Yeah.
yes, I will take the supersize.
Finally,
Yes,
finally get the supersize.
that's really funny. So, speaking of light topics, what philosophy have you found leads to the opposite of a good life? Despair, loneliness,
Ooh.
depression. Like, is there a certain philosophy that you've noticed has a trend to lead downward?
Honestly, nothing specific comes to mind. I think the obvious answer would be nihilism. I think a lot of people would probably fill that blank in with that philosophy. But I don't even know if nihilism necessarily has to equate to a sort of downward spiral in that way. I could totally see somebody who views life with a sort of nihilistic philosophical vantage point and still lives a reasonably functional and even, quality enough life, quality enough experience. This is going to sound like maybe I'm trying hard to be against the grain here, but I think forcing too optimistic of a philosophy down your own throat can sometimes be just as problematic. And so I won't pick a particular school of thought for that, but I will say that if you're experiencing questions or concerns or doubts about something that one school of philosophy or one school of thought even caters to and helps you grapple with, denying that and sort of absorbing the contrast or the opposite of that in spite of what you truly are feeling and thinking about, I see that as perhaps more detrimental than just somebody who's like, oh yeah, I see, I have a nihilistic out view of the world, like most things are without meaning and without like fundamental value, but I still am able to continue on and endure. That's maybe not an ideal situation, but it's better than somebody who's maybe experiencing doubts around that stuff, but just force feeds themselves the opposite for the mere sake of, I cannot approach or face head on these sorts of thoughts and mental experiences. So I won't single out any philosophy, but I will say that denying your own frame of mind, your own concerns, your own way that thoughts are starting to emerge in your head, going against that rather than exploring it and accepting it and figuring out the best way to grapple with them while embracing them fully or acknowledging them fully at least. I see the most dangerous form of philosophy is the one that opposes your own sensibilities for the mere sake of just trying to deny your own sensibilities.
That's an interesting point about nihilism, because it does seem like the obvious answer. Nothing has meaning, nothing matters. It could lead to a very dark, depressing view where you're like, why even get out of bed in the morning? Nothing matters. Mm-hmm. But I like how there is a light side to nihilism, possibly. If you could be like, wait a second, nothing matters. So why not just do everything and try everything? If why not take a big risk? Because losing everything doesn't matter. You could make that work for you in a way, I guess.
Yeah, and I think people do. I don't know how everybody who views the world purely nihilistically feels and experiences their thoughts and their relationship with the world, but I think I would be pretty confident in assuming that there's enough of those people who continue on in a way that's reasonable enough, positive enough, despite the sort of foundation of a sort of philosophical worldview that would seem to counter any worthwhile experience. And like I said, I think the worst thing you can do for yourself is to not allow yourself to feel and think what you're thinking, acknowledge those thoughts, and then go from there. If that's positive, by all means. If it's negative, also by all means. But let's figure out what we're actually feeling and thinking, try to get to some semblance of understanding around those. And then you kind of, I think most people map their sensibilities onto philosophy rather than philosophy onto sensibilities. You find yourself with the philosophical worldview as a virtue or as a byproduct of the fact that you feel a certain way already. You don't arrive at, in my case, absurdism because I thought absurdism had the best argument for life and it convinced me. I already felt that way, and absurdism mirrored my sensibilities and helped me make sense of a sort of, creative way of experiencing those thoughts and feelings. And I think a lot of people that arrive at a particular worldview, it's sort of a downward mapping rather than an upward. You don't figure out, how do I think about the world? I'm going to be convinced the best by a certain worldview, and then I'll take that one. You already have a sense, and you figure out which worldview helps you make more sense of that. And so I think the most important thing to do for yourself is to recognize that and not resist that. And then hopefully, even if you end up on the nihilistic end of the spectrum, you can still figure out how to utilize a frame of mind and a perspective of the world that doesn't just totally paralyze you. And again, coming back to our sort of several questions ago, the illusions, no matter what you believe, the illusions of meaning and free will and even hope kind of persist no matter what you, for the most part, those are like innate features of the human mind. No matter what you believe, there's somehow those things still prong into it and hold a sort of foundation at the crux of all worldviews. There's a certain kind, even the most hopeless nihilistic worldviews, there's a kind of hope that you just cannot remove. They are just embedded into it, just by virtue of the way the human mind has to function. And so it's more about authenticity and self-recognition than it is about objectivity or pure practicality, at least from my perspective. And again, I think no matter what, if you do that, you can still find hope and you can still find wonder and meaning.
It's very encouraging because I've noticed quite a large rise in cynicism. Just reading comments, talking to young people. For instance, you say, are you saving for retirement? They'll be like, what's the point? The world's not going to exist in 20 years. Or the younger people are right to be very cynical. I mean, they have no faith in our government, in our institutions. You ask them, what do you want to study in college? They're like, AI is just going to overtake everything. And I think adopting this cynical worldview is a fair view because it's like a defense mechanism. It's like, I'm not going to try because I'm not going to lose. But I think that if you don't try, you'll never win. So like cynics never lose, but they never win. And I'm curious to get your take on cynicism. Like, what do you think's a good antidote to cynicism? Is cynicism a good path to take, or?
The last question is the easiest to answer first. No, I don't think cynicism is, I guess I would separate that from many of the other sort of schools of thought that I was referring to. I would say cynicism is probably worse than nihilism. I don't know if they're quite comparable on the same plane, but there's something about nihilism where you could say you brought this up a moment ago, there's no inherent meaning, there's no inherent value, but I could still like, because of that, I can feel compelled to make the most of every moment. I can experience, every moment in every relationship and every endeavor with a certain degree of intensity by virtue of my own subjective experience, so long as it's in relation to values, blah, blah, blah. But cynicism basically reduces everything to like, everything is dysfunctional. Everything is not only without meaning, but totally negative and pointless. So I see cynicism as perhaps the best answer to your other question about what would be the most, problematic philosophical or sort of frame of mind to take. How we deal with that is not something I would ever try to endeavor to answer, because I totally can get why, especially younger folks right now, from what I can tell, would feel that way. If I was 15 years younger right now, I think I would be incredibly cynical. And I was pretty cynical, when I was, younger as well. So just, I feel like cynicism is systematically and societally injected by virtue of, especially when you're in your adolescence and early adulthood, when you feel like the odds of you being a part of progression and growth in the culture and system you're born into is essentially impossible or near impossible, I mean, why would you? Why would you care about it? Why would you be hopeful? Your best bet is to game the system, to gamble, to scam, whatever it is. I mean, you're totally removed from feeling like you're a part of something that you were supposed to be guaranteed to have some, upswing and longevity in. And so cynicism is super concerning and super understandable at the same time. And I don't know if like somebody like 14, 15 years old asked me, why should I be hopeful of the future right now? I would try my best to give them an answer that sounded inspiring and philosophical. But in terms of practicality, in terms of system-oriented, like, giving them something tangible about why they would have something to hold on to, I don't know if I would be able to give them a very cogent response. My only hope is that things work themselves out like they typically have seemed to do, but we're always hindsight biasing ourselves individually and culturally. And so every time we think that a technology or a world or like a cultural worldview has been okay, has worked itself out, there's tons of people and generations that have been consumed and suffered as a product or as a result of that, transference of power and resources and everything else. So not a very uplifting answer, but I hope they can, be the, this is about as corny as an answer as you can get, be the change that you would want to see. You gotta create what you would hope is worthwhile. And there's a sort of a network effect where if you instead of being cynical and ironic about your, the way you engage with the world, you're sincere and hopeful, that inspires more people to be the same. So it's sort of a tipping scale. You put one more person on one side, it can change the entire dynamic of the future. And I'm not necessarily hopeful, but I do hope that we get more of the new generation, the younger generation, on the side of sincerity and authenticity. And I will say that one of your recent videos about AI laid out a good argument about how maybe technology is skewing the scale so much one way that people are going to have to start to respond in kind on the opposite end. And so we might brute force our way to a greater level of humanity and sincerity in the mid to near term future. And I'd love to see that be the case.
Thank you. Yeah, that video was born out of just kind of a frustration with AI slop and seeing the way things were going and just wondering about, okay, AI is delivering this promise, or they're giving us this promise that AI is going to help us unleash our greatest creative potential. But that's not really what we're seeing. We're seeing a bunch of just slop and regurgitated nonsense, and it's just like a regurgitation of a regurgitation of a regurgitation. There's nothing left for AI to train on. And so, no amount of AI algorithms is going to manufacture anything meaningful. It can try to mask as something that we've produced in the past and kind of scramble it around and try to make it look like something new. But ultimately, anything meaningful is rooted in experience, in human experience. And you cannot manufacture that. I mean, I'm thinking about like Lord of the Rings is my favorite movie. And the scenes in Lord of the Rings that I get most excited about are when like something crazy happened on set behind the scenes, and I'm like, oh, that's the scene where he broke his ankle. That's the scene where like they had to do it 50 takes. And for some reason, watching it for the 100th time, that backstory gives the scene even more meaning for me. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about, but there's a scene where Aragorn gets really frustrated and kicks a helmet in Lord of the Rings. He actually broke his foot in that scene. Okay. And he's screaming in pain. And he's actually in a lot of pain.
The movie?
In the movie?
In the movie, he's screaming. Okay.
In the movie, he's screaming in pain, but he actually broke his foot in that scene, and he is literally in a lot of pain. So I'm like, that's a real scream. And for me, like every time that scene comes around, I'm like, yo, you know what happened in the scene? And the AI slop is the opposite of that. It's just this like glossy, shiny, surface level thing with nothing behind it. And for some people, that's okay. You know, they just want to be entertained. Some people are just going to want a robot sex partner. They're not going to want a messy romance. But I feel like more and more people are going to step away and look the other direction and want real experiences. They're going to embrace the imperfections of humanity.
Absolutely. No, I think that's really well put. And one example I always think about when it comes to this is chess. So I'm not a chess player. I don't have a great understanding of chess, but I know that computers and sort of algorithmic systems have been able to beat human players for a long time now. And not just beat, like kind of, but like absolutely demolish. And yet we don't watch chess tournaments between computer systems or humans against computer systems. Chess tournaments still exist and are still pretty popular, at least within that community, amongst chess players that are humans. For the pure purpose of not because we want to see what's the most optimal game of chess that can possibly be played, how quick can it be, how perfect can it be. We want to see how optimal and how perfect it can be within the constraints of a human mind against another human mind, because we as humans want to, you know, that's what's interesting to us. And entertainment is slightly like pure entertainment, pure like mind-numbing entertainment is slightly different than that. But there's a giant spectrum between, you know, your most mind-numbing of reality shows all the way down to something more thoughtful and more cognizant that requires a little bit of mental engagement. And I think that space is going to retain a significant vastness now and into the future, where we care about, like, for example, right now, you and I are talking on this podcast. If we were two LLMs talking, I can't imagine anybody. Why would anybody watch that? You could just do that yourself if that's what the technology allowed. And so people are going to be interested in humans still talking, and people are still going to talk to each other because you care about human perspective, even if it's able to be optimized, even if an LLM can optimize the sentence better than we can, even if we can have a more coherent conversation if we were large language models. We don't care about the optimal coherence. We care about what two people are talking about as two people. And I think in the same way that we care about two chess players being two people, we'll continue to care about people having conversations and people expressing their ideas as people. I would think forever. I don't see a world where that pocket doesn't exist in a meaningful sense. There will be so many other things that will have been intruded on by AI and that sort of technology. But as long as we still talk to humans, which I would think would be forever, we'll still care about human perspective and everything that surrounds or expresses that perspective.
Yeah, well put. I think AI has kind of mastered the corporate speak. And who would want to watch two corporate robots talking to each other? You know, like we want the ums, the ahs, the pauses, the stutters, the tangents. You know, we don't want just this like perfectly coherent, grammatically perfect thing. You know, I'm making mistakes right now in the way I'm talking. Please the viewer.
Right.
But, you know, I'm like thinking about the field of painting. You know, before the invention of photography, painter's job was to like capture a photorealistic image of a person. You know, that was like gonna lock that image in stone. And so they had to like get as close to reality as they could. And you look at these old Renaissance paintings and they're so anatomically correct. Everything is like, the light is correct. Everything, it looks like a photo. It's beautiful. And then once photography is invented, I'm sure there was a thought with a lot of painters like, oh God, what are we going to do now? You know, are we just obsolete? But that's not the case with what happened with painting. Painters moved into a different arena. You know, you get like Van Gogh, and it became more about this expression of the human experience embedded in the painting. Like we want to see the art through the eyes of the painter. You know, a good painter can make a doorknob look very amusing. And you know, painters are able to do something that a photo can't do. And we really enjoy that. So I think possibly something similar will happen in the space of content creation, where you have the technology to create these like perfectly curated CGI videos. Sure. Okay. Maybe there's value in that, and that'll be around forever. But there's also still going to be a value in like the authentic painters who are expressing the other side of that. I don't think that'll go away either. But we also might be heading towards like an era where we're like in a post-screen trust. You know, we can't trust anything from a screen anymore. I think we're also moving that direction.
I'm curious what you're thinking when you say that. I have a sense, but I'd love to hear more of your thoughts on that particular point.
Well, yeah, for the last like 50 or 60 years, we've gotten most of our information from screens. Our news,
Yep.
you know, if something happens and it's caught on camera, usually that's going to put somebody away in court. Oh, we got it on camera. You know, it's so easy to make deep fakes now that I don't know if we're going to be able to trust anything that is on a screen anymore. I think we're quickly approaching that period. So, I mean, OpenAI just shut down Sora, which I thought was interesting. There's a lot of legal issues, and it was costing them over $15 million a day to run it. So they were just burning through billions of dollars. But I mean, what did Sora really, what value did it really add to anything? I mean, it just opened the floodgates for people to, it incentivized people to make slop.
Yes.
Yeah. You had like,
yes, absolutely.
You had Bugs Bunny slam dunking on Squidward. You know, like, I mean, I guess that's kind, I mean, I'm sure some cool things came from it, but it was just a avalanche of garbage that we didn't know what to do with. Yeah.
Right. And so what do you think comes after a post-screen world? What does that look like? What do we trust? I mean, obviously we existed functionally before screens, so there's a theoretical world where we could exist with screens without trusting screens. But having created such a dependency on our, trust and information around screens for the, last couple decades, how do we make that transition? What do you think that looks like? Do you have any sense?
Well, the last video that you just mentioned was very optimistic. It was about how this AI slop is going to eventually let us know what it means to be human, and we're going to come across into this renaissance. But I'm actually working on a very dystopian video right now that is the opposite of that, which is more about the dystopian nightmare that is coming our way, which is complete and total AI surveillance, where we're all living in this panopticon, but it's like the perfect panopticon that has all of our data instantaneously. Every decision, every movement is tracked and logged, and whoever controls that system is like God. So I'm still fleshing out how that's going to play out, but there's like everything, there's the paradox. There's the dystopian future, and then there's the extremely optimistic heavenly future, and it's almost like you kind of need one to have the other. It's like the yin and yang. You can't have the yin without the yang.
Agreed. Yeah, and I mean, each of us can try to participate in the whatever side is the better version, the optimistic side, as best we can. But there's something, I don't want to sound fatalistic, but there's something inevitable about the way these things are going to play out. You want to inspire each of us as much positive change and participate in the side that we think is the most meaningful as strongly and as often as we can. And then the cards are going to kind of fall where they are. And that's how things have gone. And one thing humanity seems to be really good at is at least pretending like the game is still worth playing. Like we end up with all these bad things happen, but we're still like, no. We're able to figure this out. Let's manage it. Let's come together. And for better or for worse, we continue to do so. And even if things become so insane and so absurd from our perspective in 30, 40, 50 years or 100 years, whatever it might be, something will orient itself, I'm hopeful, in a way that, makes it worth continuing, even if it's the illusion of it being worth continuing. We are very impressive magicians. Like I said earlier, we can convince ourselves of illusions in ways that aren't just coping mechanisms per se, but are actually useful mechanisms and really profound ingenuity of a sort of spirit of life, the same spirit of life that built us to begin with.
Well, the good news is the more dystopian and crazy things get, the more your videos will stand out. Like the more,
Maybe.
you know, like the more we struggle with a decision, the more important that video that you made about making decisions is. And I think telling allegories and parables, like a metaphor for what we're going through, is really easy to relate to and really powerful. Mm-hmm. And yeah, I'm looking forward to telling stories that remind people of what it means to be human in different ways.
Well put. Yeah, I mean, I think as long as we can retain that and share that, express that, and engage with that, we'll be okay.
Yeah, I made a video earlier this year that was about these small moments mean everything. And
yeah,
that video had a really big impact on people. It was based on a poem that I came across on Instagram from this page called Parents' Place. And they wrote a poem about a 85-year-old woman who basically has a dream where she goes back to being 36 again. She's in her 36-year-old body just for one day. And this time everything's different. She sees the mess, the Legos on the floor, her kid asking to read a bedtime story, snacks on the floor. You know, all these little moments of the daily routine suddenly become extremely meaningful because she gets to relive them for one day. And she realizes how much she had in that moment. And she knows that her son is soon going to be out in the world and he's going to be bigger and busy. But for this one moment, he's hugging her and he wants a bedtime story. And I think that one had a really big impact on people. Like the amount of people crying in that, I mean, everybody was like, I couldn't even make that video without crying. It was crazy. And it was just really profound and it puts things into perspective. So I think I'm going to try to focus on stories that help put things into perspective in a way, and maybe point out things that we're getting astray from, things that we're missing. Yeah. So there's no shortage of content.
Yeah, that's a difficult, I find it's a difficult endeavor, but certainly one of the most worthwhile endeavors. And I think the crux of the sort of message of that story, or one of the cruxes, is, you know, how important it is to recenter our attention and perspective on, I mean, this is a little bit maybe cheesy, but the presence of the moment, and trying to, as often as we can, disengage from the past, like dependency on reconciling the past and, you know, depending on the future, and just recognizing what we're experiencing right now is enough and worthwhile. And even if that comes with negative emotions or negative bodily states, there's still something to be had that's profound about a deep recognition and presence with what's happening right now, and a holistic embrace of that. And that's not a, you know, for certain people, that's a very difficult thing. Others, it's maybe a little bit easier. But just little moments of that throughout life can make it all worthwhile.
100%. And you had a book called Millions of Little Threads, which I read the summary of it, and it said it explores humanity's increasing alienation from itself. And I wanted to like double click on an alienation from itself. Like, what did you mean by alienation from ourselves? Like, how are we alienating from ourselves?
So that book, it's a novella. It's a sort of short mid-length story about a mid-term future scenario where brain-machine interfaces are essentially becoming equivalent to smartphones for the first time. So when like the iPhone first came out, it kind of like took the world by storm, and all of a sudden, if you didn't have one, you're a weirdo, or a smartphone at least. And so that story takes place in a world where the same case is for brain-machine interfaces. And this individual, the main character, experiences a bunch of technical issues with his brain-machine interface. But the world has been so technologically augmented and algorithmically filtered that his need to troubleshoot the conditions of his brain machine interface that's now integrated into his entire being and his entire perspective of the world. He has to troubleshoot what's going on, but there's this, terrible bureaucratic system. It's all like chatbots trying to help him that don't give him any resolutions, and he's experiencing all these glitches in his head, trying to make sense of like, how do I keep going about my day-to-day life when now I'm like one and the same as this technology, and the only help I have is from these corporate chatbot, these corporate companies with their chatbots that don't care about me. So when it comes to alienization from ourselves, that is what I mean. I mean that the more advanced we get in those sorts of realms, the further away we pull ourselves from connection and direct connection around. When you experience, like humanity is always, as soon as it became cognizant and self-referential and able to ask questions, we've experienced glitches of the mind. Like questions and uncertainties have been sort of glitches of the mind, but we've been able to commune with those amongst other people and communities and tribes and explorations of art. But the further we technologize and algorithmicize those sorts of problems, the less it seems we can really like resolve those problems, those glitches of the mind, in a way that feels resonant, in a way that feels real. Even if we aren't able to ultimately like solve the conditions of the mind, a chatbot feels like the furthest possible version of a solution that would ever make me feel comfortable, or like I have something to be gained by an experience. If I experience a problem, a mental problem, and a chatbot tells me, yeah, why don't you get in a 30-minute wait timeline in this sort of chat, the next human agent will get you, will provide, and then 30 minutes goes by, you don't get an answer. It's sort of this increasing alienization that we experience as a result of the commodification and technologizing of human problems, and that's sort of what I'm getting at there. I don't know if that answers your question fully, but it's a difficult question to answer succinctly, clearly, without reading the book, because the book is my best answer to the question. But it's about distancing ourselves from our problems through technology, and that creates an alienization from ourselves, I feel.
Yeah, there's a couple thoughts that came to mind, but one of it is that Jean Bouillard, he was a philosopher in the 50s and 60s, and when he went to Disneyland for the first time, he said, oh my God, this is going to kill the need to go to France and Germany. Like, I have Germany land right here. I have France land right here. Why would I get on a plane and go all the way to Europe when I can just enjoy? You got India land and you got the Middle East right here. Like, this simulation of the world is better than actually going out into the world. And from that idea, he actually prophesized like social media, and people, instead of living their lives, they were going to become voyeurs of their life. So instead of wearing shoes, you were going to look at an image of a shoe or something.
Right.
And instead of having sex in real life, he figured that people would get in these like sex machines and just lay there. And his theory is that we were going to get more and more alienated from reality by just being voyeurs of voyeurs of voyeurs. And interesting theory, but your story reminded me of Franz Kafka, The Trial. Because I just watched your video about him, and it was like, you wake up and you have to go to court. You don't even know what it's for. And then you're pushed around all these like things, and nobody knows what's going on, and it's just absurd. And then you end up going to jail for something that you don't even know what you did. Nobody will even tell you.
Yeah, I mean, that book was, I'm heavily inspired by Kafka in a lot of the things I explore and pieces I write. And that book is definitely Kafka-esque, brought into sort of the modern world. Because, like I said, a lot of it is this main character, Kennedy, experiencing these glitches from a technology, trying to troubleshoot them in a world that has no answers and no system that can fully answer them, because it's no longer interested in answers of those kind. And in the same way that the trial with Kay also begins with Kennedy and Kay. I don't know if you'll notice that, but he can't he can't make sense of why he's being charged and where the answers are for his his trial and his charge. So it's sort of a technological rendition of that in many ways.
Very good. So we're getting to the end of our time here. What is next for Pursuit of Wonder?
I'm trying to do a lot of the same and incorporate myself a little bit more into the videos. So far it's been harder to do that, but I've enjoyed experimenting with formats that include me on screen a little bit more. And so I want to kind of continue doing a lot of the same that I have done with experimentation around format and the inclusion of myself. And I'd love to see a future where, more books and more different formats of media that kind of embody the same essence of Pursuit of Wonder continue to be published and produced into the world alongside as well.
I love that. I would love to see you make like a feature film. I think some of these ideas you have would make great movies.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I see a lot of comments saying that. I have for a long time. I've had some people like reach out to me and try to connect me with people, and it's just sort of fallen on its face. It's never gone anywhere. It's a really hard industry to breach entry into, particularly going from like a faceless YouTube channel, even with, good story or not, it's a difficult transition to make. But I'd love to see a future where an anthology series or a film, short film, whatever, more of that sort of stuff exists either on Pursuit of Wonder or adjacent to Pursuit of Wonder. And then I love writing books. I love writing all kinds of books. I'd love to continue to both write my own books and help other content creators who sort of share in a perspective around what it means to be a writer and a creator online that might want to also sidestep onto, publishing something, helping them publish books. All of those things are things I'm entertaining in the future, but right now I'm just making sure I keep making what I want to make.
Yeah, well, I'm very impressed. Your channel has been such a beacon of light for so long, and it's still going strong. Like, sadly, I've seen so many great philosophical channels just kind of, I don't know, get tossed aside by the algorithm. And I'm in communication with a lot of those channels because there's almost nothing more troubling than the algorithm just turning its eye away from your channel. And I mean, there's almost no better feeling than going viral. You feel like you're flying. You're like, yes. And the algorithm completely ignoring you is the opposite of that feeling. You're like, did I displease the great, powerful father algorithm? Like, what did I do wrong? And it's sad to see some of my favorite channels, or some channels that I used to get a lot of value from, kind of just gradually waning away into irrelevance. And but I'm really glad that your channel is probably going stronger than almost any other philosophy channel. So you found a way to keep it entertaining and keep it relevant.
I guess so, and I'm very grateful and very fortunate, at least for the time being, until the algorithmic gods decide I'm next.
If you're listening, please keep us in your.
I'll sacrifice whatever you need.
Sweet. Well, Robert Pantano, this has been a great conversation. Your channel, Pursuit of Wonder, is one of my favorites. So anybody listening, go check that channel out. It's the best. I'm sure you've already seen many of their videos, but many of his videos. And I look forward to many more of your creations.
Thanks, Mark. Likewise. I appreciate you having me.
Anytime.